Episode 4, The Fallout. Manhattan woke up that morning with its usual rhythm, but for Russell Maxwell and Gloria, the city might as well have been silent. Their carefully curated lives were beginning to change, and no amount of noise could drown out the reality of what was happening. For weeks, I had watched them, studied them, and planned every move with surgical precision. Today, the repercussions of their deceit would finally hit with full force. I arrived at the office early, the building eerily quiet except for the soft hum of cleaning equipment echoing through the marble lobby. As I stepped out of the elevator on the 45th floor, the stillness of my surroundings felt almost symbolic. It was the calm before the storm, and I was ready. At 8 a.m., my phone buzzed with a call from Marcy King. Her tone carried a sharp edge of urgency, tempered by satisfaction. "It's begun," she said. "The police have formally launched their investigation. Maxwell Pacific Holdings accounts are frozen, and Russell was notified early this morning." I leaned back in my chair, letting the news sink in. "And the board?" "They're in shock," Marcy replied, "but they're firmly behind you." The unanimous vote to remove Russell left no room for doubt. "They see you as the company's stabilizing force," I said. "Let's make sure they stay that way. Keep the updates consistent, but don't overwhelm them. Control the narrative." Marcy hesitated for a moment before adding, "Gloria was served with a subpoena this morning. She's officially tied to the investigation." I allowed myself a brief smile. The timing was deliberate, a calculated move to ensure that both Russell and Gloria faced pressure simultaneously. They had woven their web of lies together, and now they would unravel it together. By mid-morning, the fallout was already spreading. News of the police investigation had rippled through the financial world, sparking speculation and panic. Though the full details hadn't yet surfaced, the industry was buzzing with whispers of fraud and betrayal. At 10:30 a.m., I convened a meeting with the senior leadership team. The air in the conference room was thick with tension, but beneath it lay a determination to weather the storm. "We're facing a serious challenge," I began, my voice calm but authoritative. "But this company has survived crises before, and we'll survive this one too. Transparency and integrity will guide us through. Our priority is to cooperate fully with the police while ensuring stability for our employees and shareholders." Marcy took over from there, walking the team through a detailed plan of action. She outlined the steps we were taking to manage the investigation, restore confidence, and address potential disruptions. Her confidence was contagious, and by the end of the meeting, the room was filled with nods of agreement and a renewed sense of purpose. As the team began to disperse, Marcy lingered, her expression thoughtful. "The staff trust you, Alex," she said. "They know you're fighting to protect the company." "They should," I replied. "This isn't just about saving the business, it's about making sure no one like Russell ever gets the chance to do this again." At 1 p.m., Thomas Reed called with another update. "Russell's panicking," he said, his tone brisk. "He's reached out to 3 more investors, but none of them are willing to touch Maxwell Pacific Holdings." "And Gloria?" I asked. "She's scrambling too," Thomas replied. "She's trying to liquidate her properties in Miami and Aspen. Everything is being rushed to the market." I leaned back, a grim satisfaction settling over me. Let her. Desperation makes people sloppy. Keep tracking everything. Thomas hesitated before continuing. "There's one more thing. Gloria's lawyer contacted Jonathan this morning. They want to discuss settlement terms for the divorce. They're realizing they've lost," I said coldly. "Make them sweat. We'll entertain their request, but only on our terms." As the day wore on, the situation escalated further. The police issued an official statement confirming their investigation, and the media frenzy began in earnest. Headlines splashed across financial news sites and social media platforms. "Russell Maxwell under fire, police investigation launched." "Leon Maxwell Enterprises rocked by fraud allegations." "Maxwell Pacific Holdings, the scandal unfolds." Calls from reporters flooded our communications department. "But we had prepared for this." A single, carefully crafted statement was released. "Leon Maxwell Enterprises is fully cooperating with the police investigation into Maxwell Pacific Holdings. The company remains committed to transparency and accountability, and we will take all necessary steps to uphold the trust of our shareholders and employees." The message was clear: Russell's actions were his own, and the company would not bear the weight of his betrayal. By late afternoon, I returned to my office, the weight of the day beginning to settle over me. As I sat at my desk, reviewing the latest updates, a new message from Thomas arrived. Gloria was spotted leaving her lawyer's office this evening. She looks shaken. See attached video. I opened the video, watching as Gloria emerged from the building. Her usual air of confidence was gone, replaced by visible anxiety. Her hair was slightly disheveled. Her steps hurried as she glanced around nervously before getting into a waiting car. So, this is what the beginning of the end looks like, I thought. For years, Gloria had carried herself with an air of invincibility, but now, the cracks in her facade were unmistakable. That evening, as the city lights flickered against the night sky, I stood by the window of my penthouse. The events of the day played through my mind like a carefully orchestrated symphony. Russell and Gloria had underestimated me, mistaking my trust for weakness and my silence for ignorance. Now, they were learning the cost of their arrogance, but the game wasn't over yet. The fallout from the police investigation unfolded with quick precision. For Russell and Gloria, each passing hour brought a new wave of consequences. By the time the sun climbed high over Manhattan, their world, so meticulously crafted, was changing. Back at the office, I sat at my desk, reviewing the latest developments. The reports from Thomas Reed and Marcy King painted a grim picture of those who hurt me. Russell's attempts to salvage his financial empire were failing, while Gloria's desperate moves to secure her assets were proving futile. At 9 a.m., Marcy walked in. She carried her tablet and a thick folder, her expression unreadable. She said, placing the folder on my desk, "Thomas sent over the latest intel. Russell is panicking. He's trying to secure funding from anyone willing to listen. But the blacklist we quietly circulated is working. No one in the industry will touch him." I allowed myself a brief smile. Good, let him drown in the silence. Marcy tapped her tablet, pulling up another report. On Gloria's end, we've tracked her asset liquidation efforts. The properties in Aspen and Miami are officially listed, but buyers are hesitant given the ongoing investigation. Her lawyer has also reached out to Jonathan again, requesting a settlement meeting. They're grasping at straws, I replied. Make them wait, let them feel the weight of their decisions. Marcy hesitated, her sharp gaze lingering on mine. You've thought of everything, haven't you? This isn't about thinking, I said, leaning back. It's about control. Russell and Gloria choose to do it. Now they'll face the consequences that they cause. By midday, the media frenzy had intensified. Headlines dominated every financial news outlet, each one more damning than the last. The phones in the communications department rang incessantly as reporters sought statements and clarifications, but our strategy remained firm, a single, controlled narrative that distanced the company from Russell's actions. At 11:30 a.m., I joined a virtual press conference to address the situation directly. The setup was simple: my desk, the company logo prominently displayed behind me, and a calm but resolute demeanor. Good morning, I began, my tone steady. As you are aware, the police have launched an investigation into Maxwell Pacific Holdings. While this is an unfortunate development, I want to assure our shareholders, employees, and the public that Lee and Maxwell Enterprises remain fully committed to transparency and accountability. We are cooperating fully with the investigation and taking all necessary steps to ensure the stability and integrity of our operations. The questions that followed were pointed but expected. I navigated them with ease, emphasizing the company's commitment to moving forward while subtly framing Russell's actions as a personal betrayal that did not reflect our values. By the time the conference ended, the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. The message had landed: Lee and Maxwell Enterprises was a victim of Russell's greed, not a co-conspirator. At 2 p.m., Thomas Reed called. He said, his voice brisk, "Russell is meeting with a private wealth advisor tonight. The location is a private club on the Upper East Side." "Is it Langley?" I asked, referring to the advisor Russell had contacted earlier. "Yes," Thomas confirmed, "and we've secured access to the meeting room." I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Russell's desperation was leading him straight into the trap. "What about Gloria?" I asked. "She's meeting her lawyer at 4 p.m., Thomas replied. "From what we've gathered, they're preparing for a potential settlement discussion. She's also made inquiries about moving overseas, though nothing concrete yet." "Overseas," I repeated, a faint smirk tugging at my lips. "She thinks she can escape." "She might try," Thomas said, "but we'll be ready." "Okay," I replied, "keep me updated on both fronts." By late afternoon, the tension was palpable. The police had ramped up their investigation, issuing subpoenas to several of Russell's associates. Meanwhile, Gloria's lawyers continued to press for a meeting, their tone growing more desperate with each passing hour. At 4:30 p.m., Marcy entered my office with another update. The board is requesting a private meeting, she said. They want to discuss the company's next steps, specifically regarding Russell's role in the Singapore project. Schedule it for tomorrow morning, I said. We'll use it to solidify our position and outline a clear recovery plan. Marcy nodded but hesitated. And what about the staff? The rumors are spreading faster than we can contain them. Let them talk, I said. The more they speculate, the more they'll realize the truth when we present it. Russell's actions betrayed this company, and we're taking every step to ensure it doesn't happen again. Marcy's gaze softened. You're handling this well, Alex. Not many people could maintain this level of control under pressure. This isn't about me, I replied. It's about the company, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect it. As evening fell, I returned to my penthouse. The city bathed in the warm glow of streetlights and towering skyscrapers. The day had been long, but the progress was undeniable. At 7 p.m., Thomas sent over the first clips from Russell's meeting with Langley. The video showed Russell seated in a plush, dimly lit room, his posture tense as he leaned forward, gesturing emphatically. I need this done tonight, Russell was saying, his voice strained. The accounts are being monitored, and I can't risk another flagged transaction. Langley, ever the professional, remained calm. These things take time, Mr. Maxwell. Moving this kind of money discreetly isn't a simple task. Russell's frustration was palpable. Time is a luxury I don't have. The conversation continued, each word painting a picture of a man on the edge. By the time the recording ended, it was clear that Russell's desperation had reached its peak. As I sat by the window, sipping a glass of scotch, I reflected on the events of the day. The walls were closing in on Russell and Gloria. The sun dipped low over Manhattan, casting long shadows across the bustling city. For most, it was just another evening in the relentless rhythm of life. But for Gloria Maxwell, this night marked the final act of her desperate gambit to salvage the wreckage of her carefully curated life. She arrived unannounced at the Lee and Maxwell Enterprises building, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she approached the front desk. The receptionist, visibly caught off guard, hesitated before reaching for the phone to notify me of her arrival. Tell her to wait, I said curtly when the call came through. I let her sit for 20 minutes, stewing in the discomfort of her own making. When I finally instructed the receptionist to send her up, I had already steeled myself for what was to come. Gloria stepped into my office, her presence a shadow of the poised, confident woman I once knew. Her designer coat hung loosely on her frame, her makeup barely masking the exhaustion etched into her face. Alexander, she began, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Thank you for seeing me. I didn't do it for you, I replied coldly, gesturing for her to sit. She hesitated, then lowered herself into the chair opposite my desk. For a moment, she said nothing, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I know you're angry, she finally said, her voice trembling. I know I've hurt you, but I need you to understand, it wasn't supposed to be this way. I leaned back, crossing my arms. How was it supposed to be, Gloria? Was I supposed to remain blind to your betrayal? Was I supposed to fund your affair while you plotted behind my back? Her cheeks flushed, and she looked down, unable to meet my gaze. I made mistakes, she whispered, but I never stopped loving you. I never wanted to hurt you. You didn't love me, I said sharply. You loved the life I provided, the power, the security, and when that wasn't enough, you threw it all away for Russell. Gloria flinched at his name, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair. It wasn't about him, she insisted. It was about feeling trapped, about wanting something for myself. I stared at her, the bitterness rising in my chest. You had everything, Gloria, a husband who trusted you, a life most people can only dream of, and you heard it. For what? A fleeting sense of freedom? Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I had fallen in love with years ago, but the feeling passed as quickly as it came. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. Please, Alex, I know I can't undo what I've done, but can't we find a better way to do things? I stood abruptly, the force of my movement startling her. There is no us, Gloria, I said, my voice cold and final. You two did that and still ask for my forgiveness. How ridiculous. We ended that the moment you chose Russell over me, over our family. over everything we built together. This conversation is over. She rose slowly, tears streaming down her face. Please, Alex, don't do this. Don't let it end like this. It ended long before tonight, I replied, turning my back to her. You just didn't realize it yet. After Gloria left, the silence in my office was deafening. I stood by the window, watching her figure disappear into the crowd below. For years, I had thought of her as my partner, my equal, but now, she was just another ghost in the long line of betrayals that had shaped my life. At 8 p.m., my phone buzzed with a call from Thomas Reed. We've got the initial findings from the police investigation, he said, and there's more. Go on, I said, my voice steady. Russell's activities have drawn the attention of they. Thomas continued, they're looking into potential charges of wire fraud. The evidence we provided gave them a solid starting point. What about Gloria? I asked. She's implicated, but not to the same extent, Thomas replied. The subpoenas revealed that while she benefited financially from Russell's schemes, there's no direct evidence tying her to the planning or execution. She'll likely face civil penalties, but criminal charges are less certain. I allowed myself a brief moment of satisfaction. Russell's greed had ensnared him completely, while Gloria's role, though significant, was secondary. Still, she wouldn't escape unscathed. What's next? I asked. The police seize remaining assets tied to Maxwell Pacific Holdings, Thomas said. Russell's accounts are frozen, and the properties he tried to transfer to offshore trusts are under investigation. It's only a matter of time before formal charges are filed. Good, I said. Keep me updated. Later that evening, I reviewed the official summary of the investigation's findings. The numbers were staggering: millions siphoned from the Singapore expansion project, misappropriated funds disguised as consulting fees, and offshore accounts used to hide the stolen money. The report detailed how Russell had funneled the funds through a labyrinth of shell companies, using Gloria's name on several transactions to create a buffer. While it was unlikely she had orchestrated the scheme, her involvement was undeniable. The police's case against Russell was airtight. Russell was arrested in his penthouse. The dramatic scene splashed across every news outlet. Wire fraud alone carried a maximum sentence of 20 years. And with the additional charges of embezzlement, he was looking at decades behind bars. As I read through the documents, a cold sense of vindication settled over me. Justice was coming, and I had made sure it would be swift and unforgiving. Gloria, meanwhile, faced her own reckoning. The properties she had rushed to sell were seized as part of the investigation. Her bank accounts were frozen, and she was forced to move out of the lavish townhouse she had once shared with me. With no assets, no reputation, and no allies, she moved back in with her estranged sister in New Jersey, a far cry from the life she had once enjoyed. That night, I stood by the window of my penthouse, the city lights stretching out before me. The weight of the day pressed heavily on my shoulders, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of closer. Gloria's tears and pleas had been nothing more than a final, desperate attempt to reclaim what she had thrown away. But I was done. The chapter of my life that included her and Russell was over, and there was no turning back. Episode 5, Rising from the Ashes. A year had passed since the storm broke. From my vantage point in my new office, an expansive suite overlooking Central Park, the world looked different. The city's familiar hum seemed quieter, more distant, as though time itself had shifted in the wake of everything that had happened. Russell Maxwell was gone, serving a 25-year sentence after being convicted on charges of. The FBI's investigation had left no stone unturned, dismantling the web of deceit he had spun with Gloria's reluctant complicity. Gloria, meanwhile, had retreated into obscurity, her once glamorous life reduced to a shadow of what it had been. But this story wasn't about them anymore, it was about me. Lee and Maxwell Enterprises had emerged from the chaos stronger than ever. The board had fully supported my leadership, allowing me to steer the company through its most challenging chapter. Under my direction, we restructured operations, implemented stricter oversight protocols, and rebranded to shed the tarnish of Russell's betrayal. The Singapore project, once a symbol of corruption, had been revitalized. We partnered with ethical developers and redirected resources to ensure it became a genuine success. It was no longer just a business venture, it was a statement of resilience and integrity. But my focus wasn't solely on the company. Over the past year, I had poured energy into something far more personal, rebuilding my life. My mornings began early, with a run through Central Park as the city stirred to life. It was during these runs that I often reflected on everything that had happened. Betrayal, pain, anger, they had all been part of my journey, but they no longer defined me. One particular morning, as the crisp air filled my lungs, I thought back to Gloria's final plea for forgiveness, her tearful eyes, the way her voice cracked as she begged for another chance. It was a memory I had replayed countless times, but each time, the outcome was the same. I felt nothing. Walking away from Gloria hadn't been easy. For years, she had been part of my life, my partner in everything, but the trust we had shared was irrevocably shattered, and no amount of tears could change that. If there was one lesson I had learned, it was this: some wounds couldn't be healed, and some chapters couldn't be rewritten. At the office, the day began with a meeting to discuss our latest philanthropic initiative. One of the most significant changes I implemented over the past year was a renewed focus on giving back. The betrayal I had endured had taught me the importance of building something meaningful, not just for myself, but for others. Today's agenda includes the launch of the Maxwell Rehabilitation Fund. Marcy King began, addressing the leadership team. She had been instrumental in the company's recovery, her steady hand guiding us through the darkest days. The fund was a project close to my heart. It aimed to provide financial and educational support to victims of corporate fraud, people who had lost their savings, livelihoods, and futures due to the greed of individuals like Russell. This isn't just about repairing our reputation, I said, addressing the team. It's about accountability. It's about making sure that no one else suffers the way so many did under Russell's schemes. The team nodded in agreement, their expressions reflecting a shared sense of purpose. After the meeting, Marcy lingered in my office. She leaned against the doorframe, her usual composure softened by a rare smile. "You've come a long way, Alex," she said. "The company, the fund, it's more than just damage control, it's real change." I met her gaze, feeling a sense of gratitude. "We couldn't have done it without you, Marcy. You've been my rock through all of this." She chuckled softly. "Don't get sentimental on me now, we've still got work to do." As the day wore on, I found myself drawn to a framed photograph on my desk. It was a picture of my family, taken long before everything had unraveled. Emma, my daughter, had been my anchor throughout the past year. Her unwavering support and belief in me had kept me going when everything else seemed to fall apart. That evening, I met her for dinner at a quiet bistro tucked away in the West Village. Over a glass of wine, we talked about everything and nothing: work, her plans for graduate school, and the mundane details of life that had become so precious to me. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "You didn't just survive this, you thrived. You turned something terrible into something good." Her words struck a chord. For so long, I had been focused on revenge, on exposing Russell and Gloria for who they were. But now, as I sat across from my daughter, I realized that revenge wasn't the endgame, freedom was. When I returned to my penthouse that night, I stood by the window, watching the city lights shimmer against the darkened sky. A year ago, those lights had seemed cold and distant, a reflection of my isolation. But now, they felt different, alive, vibrant, full of promise. My phone buzzed with a notification. It was a news article about the Maxwell Rehabilitation Fund, praising its mission and impact. I skimmed the piece, feeling a sense of fulfillment that no business deal or court victory had ever brought me. The day after the Maxwell Rehabilitation Fund's official launch felt like a turning point. It wasn't just another corporate initiative, it was a personal mission. Walking into the office that morning, I felt an unfamiliar sense of calm. The chaos of the past year had settled, replaced by a steady determination to move forward. Marcy King greeted me with her usual efficiency, a folder tucked under one arm and a steaming cup of coffee in the other. "Morning, Alex," she said, placing the folder on my desk. "The feedback from yesterday's event has been overwhelmingly positive. The press is praising the fund as a bold step in corporate accountability." I flipped through the folder, scanning the highlights. Headlines like "Lee Enterprises sets new standard for corporate responsibility" and "Maxwell Fund offers hope to fraud victims" leaped off the pages. "They're calling it a game changer," Marcy continued. "It's not just good PR, it's making a real difference." I nodded, feeling a rare sense of pride. "It's a start," I said, "but there's still a lot of work to do." She gave me a knowing smile. "That's why you're the right person to lead this. You don't just rebuild, you transform." By mid-morning, the office was abuzz with activity. Teams were coordinating new initiatives, investors were showing renewed confidence, and the atmosphere was one of progress. But even as we moved forward, the past had a way of resurfacing. At 11 a.m., my assistant knocked lightly on the door. "Mr. Lee," she said hesitantly, "you have a visitor." I frowned. "I don't have any meetings scheduled." She didn't have an appointment, the assistant stammered, but she insisted it was urgent. "She's Gloria Maxwell." For a moment, the name hung in the air like a ghost. I hadn't seen Gloria since our final confrontation nearly a year ago. Her tearful pleas, her desperate attempts to salvage what was left of our relationship, they had left a bitter taste that lingered even now. "Send her in," I said finally, my voice steady. Gloria entered the office with a hesitant step. Her once commanding presence diminished. She wore a simple coat, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look smaller, almost fragile. "Alexander," she began, her voice tentative, "thank you for seeing me." I gestured for her to sit, keeping my expression neutral. "Sit down, please." She lowered herself into the chair across from me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For a moment, she seemed at a loss for words, her gaze darting around the room as though searching for something to anchor herself. "I heard about the fund," she said finally. "It's incredible what you're doing, helping people who've been hurt by all of this." Her words were measured and carefully chosen. I could see the effort she was putting into crafting her narrative, but I wasn't interested in performances. "Why are you here, Gloria?" I asked, cutting to the chase. She flinched slightly at my tone but pressed on. "I wanted to apologize," she said, "for everything, for what I did to you, to us, to the company. I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed you to hear it." I leaned back, studying her. The woman before me was a far cry from the confident, polished Gloria I had once known, but her words felt hollow, as though she was saying what she thought I wanted to hear rather than what she truly felt. "Thanks, I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do," I said, my voice cold but calm. Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. "I remember when we were together. Now, I've lost everything," she whispered. "The life we built together, the respect I had, it's all gone. I know I can't make up for the mistakes I made in the past. I'm trying to make amends every day. Now seeing you like this makes me very happy." I nodded and replied, "I hope you for a good life. Take care of yourself." Gloria sat in silence for a long moment, her tears flowing freely now. Finally, she stood, her movements slow and deliberate. "I'm sorry one more time. Goodbye, Alex," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. Without another word, she turned and walked out of my office, her figure disappearing down the hallway. The encounter left a strange stillness in its wake. I sat at my desk, staring out the window as the city bustled below. Gloria's visit had been unexpected. If anything, it reaffirmed my decision to walk away from her and everything she represented. At 1 p.m., Thomas Reed called with an update on the Maxwell Rehabilitation Fund's impact. "We've already received over 200 applications for support," he said. "People are sharing their stories, some lost their life savings, others their homes. The fund is giving them hope, Alex." His words were a reminder of why I had started this initiative in the first place. Russell and Gloria's actions had caused untold damage, but this fund was a way to begin repairing it. "Let's make sure we review every case thoroughly," I said. "These people deserve our best efforts." "Already in motion," Thomas replied. "This is going to change lives." That evening, I attended a small gathering at the newly opened community center funded by the Maxwell Rehabilitation Fund. The space was bright and welcoming, filled with families and individuals who had been directly impacted by corporate fraud. As I walked through the crowd, I spoke with people who had rebuilt their lives with the fund's help. Their stories were a testament to resilience, and their gratitude was humbling. One woman, a middle-aged teacher who had lost her retirement savings, approached me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, gripping my hand tightly. "You didn't have to do this, but you did, and it's given me hope again." Her words stayed with me long after the event ended. Back at my penthouse, I stood by the window, watching the city lights shimmer against the night sky. Gloria's visit, the fund's success, the people whose lives were beginning to heal, it all felt like part of a larger narrative. Manhattan stretched out beneath me, a sea of glittering lights that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of new beginnings. The city had always been a place of reinvention, a constant reminder that no matter how turbulent the storm, there was always a dawn waiting to break. Tonight, as I stood by the window of my penthouse, the weight of the past year finally felt like it had lifted. The charity gala earlier that evening had been a triumph, not just for the Maxwell Rehabilitation Fund but for everything it represented. It was proof that even from the deepest betrayals, something meaningful could emerge. The day had started with a meeting that set the tone for what would follow. Marcy King, my steadfast partner in rebuilding the company, arrived at my office with her usual efficiency. "You're going to like this," she said, placing a report on my desk. I opened the folder, scanning the pages. It detailed the fund's progress, hundreds of applications processed, millions of dollars distributed, and countless lives touched. "These are the stories," Marcy continued, "that define what we're doing here." A retired teacher in Colorado who lost everything is now rebuilding her life. A small business owner in Ohio has reopened his store. Families who thought they'd never recover are finding hope again. I nodded, the numbers and testimonials filling me with a quiet pride. "It's working," I said simply. "It is," Marcy replied, "and it's not just the fund. Investors are responding, too. Our reputation has rebounded, and confidence in the company is higher than it's been in years." "Good," I said. By mid-morning, the office was alive with energy. The buzz of phones, the soft clatter of keyboards, and the hum of conversations created a backdrop of productivity that had been missing during the company's darkest days. The afternoon brought more updates, each one reinforcing the progress we had made. A meeting with the board highlighted the company's financial recovery, while discussions with new investors underscored the renewed faith in our vision. "This isn't just about numbers," I told the board. "It's about values. We've proven that integrity and accountability aren't just words, they're the foundation of everything we do. And that's why we're thriving." The board members nodded in agreement, their trust in my leadership evident. That evening, I attended a private dinner hosted by one of the fund's major donors. The intimate setting was a stark contrast to the grandeur of the gala, but the conversations were just as impactful. As we sat around the table, sharing stories of the fund's impact, I was struck by the genuine emotion in the room. These weren't just business leaders, they were people who believed in the power of second chances. One guest, an elderly man who had been a victim of corporate fraud decades earlier, shared his story. "I lost everything," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "My home, my savings, my dignity. But seeing what you're doing with this fund, it gives me hope that the next generation won't have to go through what I did." His words stayed with me as the evening wound down, a reminder of why I had chosen this path. When I returned to my penthouse later that night, the city was quiet, its usual frenetic energy replaced by a peaceful stillness. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window, the events of the day replaying in my mind. The betrayal that had once consumed me no longer held power over my thoughts. Russell and Gloria were relics of a chapter one had closed, their shadows fading as I focused on what lay ahead. My phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from a young woman named Rachel, one of the beneficiaries of the Maxwell Fund. "Mr. Lee," it read, "I just wanted to thank you again for what you've done. The fund didn't just help me rebuild my life, it reminded me that there are still good people in the world. You've inspired me to give back, and I hope one day I can do for others what you've done for me. Thank you." I set the phone down, her words resonating deeply. For so long, I had been driven by the need to expose the truth and seek justice. But now, my purpose had shifted. It wasn't about retribution, it was about redemption. The next morning, I woke early, the city bathed in the soft light of dawn. As I ran through Central Park, the air crisp and invigorating, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. Life had a way of testing us, of breaking us down to our core, but it also had a way of rebuilding, of offering second chances to those willing to take them. Back at the office, the day unfolded with its usual intensity. Meetings, phone calls, and planning sessions filled the hours, each one a step forward in the journey we had begun. By the time evening fell, I found myself once again at the community center funded by the Maxwell Fund. The space was alive with laughter and conversation, a testament to the resilience of those who had refused to give up. As I moved through the crowd, speaking with families and individuals whose lives had been touched by our efforts, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. What would you do if given a chance to start over? Could you rise above the pain and build something greater? Or would the weight of the past hold you back? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because this isn't the end. Thank you for watching the video.